r/TooAfraidToAsk. Room Champion says, why did the Black Lives Matter movement die down so much? I remember about 4 years ago now, almost everyone was hopping on the BLM bandwagon and posting all over social media. Things like, I know I'll never understand what it's like to be black, but and if you are silent, you are part of the problem. Politicians were using it to their advantage. Now it almost seems like it's political suicide to support it. Racism is still talked about, of course, but rarely BLM. We went from this will be the biggest anti-racism change in history to almost complete silence with no real improvement in racial divisions. Was it truly just a fad? What caused the steep decline? Edit. I also noticed that some people who posted the black squares later deleted the posts. Pratiatko says, much the same as Occupy Wall Street, it both lacked concrete implementable policy goals and a leader to be the face of the organization to push those policies and disassociate the movement from the more extreme element that would co-opt it. Mechanic says, multiple BLM movements turned out to be grifts with large amounts of either money laundering, extortion, or plain blatant fraud. Ijiranit says, was it not that the movement as whole was exposed as a grift? It all seemed to die down after it was revealed the founders had bought themselves mansions for millions. Hefty C8516 says, as a black woman, I'd have to say I noticed the greatest shift in how other black people viewed the movement when Oluwatoyin Saleh was murdered. Many black women started feeling like their lives didn't even matter within the movement. The mismanagement of funds, the shaddiness behind it all, the hijacking of the movement by people who just wanted to destroy and steal. Many decided to wash their hands clean of activism completely. Thessalent Bob 123 says, it's wild, I never even heard of her, it is such a tragic story. Buxgerald 416 says, that's the point. There are many black women you'll never hear about. Snoop Snob says, part of it is that the BLM organization was poorly run and the leaders used funds for personal gain, leading to some lawsuits. Another, I think, is that a lot of the protests devolved into riots and ended up hurting the very people they were claiming to be fighting for. I remember seeing a video of an elderly, wheelchair-bound black woman talking about how the only store and pharmacy that she could get to from her house had been completely destroyed. She had no idea where or how she would get her meds and food. It's really hard to hold public support when you've burned down a whole town. Another aspect no one wants to admit is that it is an election year and it was a useful movement to get people to rally behind and motivate them to vote a certain way. This happens all the time, particularly when the incumbent can be painted as the bad guy. Vote us in and we can fix this kinda stuff. On a side note, I think the current Gaza protests are similar, but r/TooAfraidToAsk. Glitch Fluff says, hypothetical, what if someone put one of those tiny cameras on a rat and then send it into Area 51? For legal reasons I'm not planning on doing this. Not thinking of doing this, IRL, please don't ban me, I'm just playing into the Area 51 thing. I'm really, I'm stoned right now, and my friends and I were talking about how much we love rats and Greg ended up making a joke about rats vs Area 51 and this got me thinking, what if we just rat edit? I love you guys, you're so fun. This was such a silly post, but the replies made me smile during a day that's already been slightly rough. Some really good ideas here too. Thanks for making my day. Close bracket. Crex Gitman says, I mean, how would you control the rat? Best bet you'll just get a look at the airfield, maybe some experimental jets if you're lucky. More likely the rat's getting snatched up by some bird before it can make far. 5K1895 says, train it to take directions via electrical shocks. Easy. Madrockthethid says, the rat would get eaten by aliens. If you're not old enough, look up V. It was a series back in the 80s. Rangedsp says, it's a lot easier flying in a drone or RC car. If they have any anti-electronic interference system in place, you won't be able to get any footage from the rat camera either. Look into line of sight remote control if you don't want to broadcast to everyone that you are there. If there's anything interesting, it will be underground, so you might need to figure out how to navigate air vents. Squirrel Master 82 says, the robot lasers would kill it. The only way in is to Naruto run. Everyone knows this. Frickin' do some research. Thiscoldba Massive says, if the rat is putting out a signal that you can receive, the people on base can receive it as well. If the rat is just recording passively, you are never going to find that rat again to retrieve the data. Either way, you aren't going to get a lot of info. Slimmer County says, okay, but if you're going hypothetical, we may as well go 200 rats, each with a Raspberry Pi module strapped to its back, streaming to Youtabliv. How's the signal interference at Area 51? Intentionally dogshit, I'd imagine? Bacatrex says, rat will go into a hole or a pipe or a garbage dump somewhere. You wouldn't see anything until a bird or a cat eats the rat, in which case there might be a split-second rapid motion on screen until the camera lands somewhere in a nondescript location. Chilichi says, I'm honestly wondering the legal ramifications more than anything. Could you be charged for having surveillance equipment on animals and letting them roam on private property? r/TooAfraidToAsk. Maleficent Stay 6778 says, is calling someone a fish racist? I live in the United Kingdom, and I'm currently going through a FAR discipline regarding an incident at a football match. I had a very minor dispute with a player from the other team. He looked a little like a fish as he had large eyes rather far apart, so I called him one. It's now been branded as a racial slur, and I've been called in for a FAR disciplinary hearing for racial abuse. I'm by no means a racist, and have never ever heard the word used as a racial slur. Would anyone in their right mind manage to find racial connotations from the word fish? For context, I'm white and the other guy was mixed race, white ex-Afro-Caribbean. Thanks for your replies. Chudy says, no, not unless y'all were at an Atlantis away game. Investigatorial 6236 says, there are football teams heavily associated with fish, like the Mariners, lol. But, that's definitely not a race. Howie Bledsoe says, it's his fault for taking the bait. Toastittle says, no it isn't, but something to keep in mind is when you are dealing with any kind of abuse situation in business, and often in sport. It doesn't matter the intent. What is looked at is the result was, and in this case he took it as a racist comment. Plead ignorance, although expect a consequence anyway. Regardless of the intent, it wasn't sportsmanlike. Wiggy49 says, I've only ever heard fish face be used racially for Asians, but that was only in the movie Gran Torino. Vital Visionary says, I've been told fish bellas is a slur in Asia for white people. Wiggy49 says, well, in Cantonese the derogatory term for white people is ghost people lol. Gladianaxis says, I'll be honest with you, no, it's not, but their assumption to cover their own asses is race because losing you as a fan is inconsequential compared to a news story announcing man experiences racial insult from white stadium goer, no punishment given. As frick, ed as it is, treating you unfairly and protecting someone else based on race is the correct business decision today. That man absolutely looks like a fish. RMP 266 says, what's he carping on about? Caverman Creator says, as someone from Wisconsin, fish is an acronym for frick, I'm Illinois shithead. Just Reddit again says, sounds more like an insult than an act of racism. Still rude, but that feels like a bit much. Just because you're of a different race doesn't make every insult you give us proof of you being racist. I'd ask if you called another white person fish, if they would be acting this way. r/TooAfraidToAsk. Cage26 says, this seems like a really stupid question, but why are the people who are worried about ingredients in a vaccine or fluoride in water not worried about getting a serious disease from a viral infection or tooth decay? DeepSea2 says, they think the former is worse and or don't fully understand the extent of the latter. Katniss85 says, we've had the privilege of being protected from these diseases and their horrific consequences. We minimize the impact in our minds and focus on all the horrible ingredients and the prevention, convincing ourselves that the cure is worse than what we were trying to prevent. Unfortunately, it will take kids dying and the resurgence of the iron lung before people start cluing in that measles, polio and even chickenpox are trivial matters. Silly Pineapple 3554 says, taking a vaccine or fluoridating water are things we do to ourselves, so they are entirely preventable. If the health concerns people believe about vaccine or fluoride are true, it would be very concerning that the government caused that happen on a large scale by incentivizing it or coercing people to do it. Meanwhile, you can't blame someone for the natural spread of a disease like COVID, and there's only a limited amount we can do in response to affect it. Think of other man-made risks such as crime. Death through violence is pretty rare compared to natural causes, so should we say that murder isn't a big deal? It doesn't work that way, they are not directly comparable. Saturnatics says, because their critical thinking skills right off the bat aren't very good. You can show them as much evidence as you want, but nothing will change their mind because they get vaccine and fluoride info off their mom Facebook group, and obviously those people know what they are doing, rather than the doctors who went to school for almost a decade. In their mind there's always the big bad wolf to look out for, and obviously in this case it's the government lying to them about things that have been studied for over a century by now. Then that just starts the timer of the classic very unfortunate Facebook status cycle of help. My son just contracted measles. I've been putting potato slices in his socks and they are not working. Any other suggestions? Hey guys, so I tried your suggestions of tea tree oil mixed with eucalyptus and they. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.